Welcome everyone, Miss Nancy here from the Azel Memorial Library, and I have a stack of awesome YA books to talk with you about. So we're going to dive right in, and the first one is an ocean story. It is called Adrift by Paul Griffin, and it is a disaster and survival story, which I love those kinds of books. So when I saw this come in, I just grabbed it. There are two sets of characters in this book. There's rich kids and there's poor kids. And the plot is that a rich girl, there's a party at a rich kid's house, and a rich girl decides to pull this stupid stunt of going out on a sailboard in the ocean during hurricane weather. And there are some poor kids at the party, and so they get dragged into this to try to go and rescue her. They get on a boat that is not prepared for this, has little gas, and they find themselves in the middle of the Atlantic fighting for their lives. So you find as the story goes on what these kids are like. John is supposed to be the level-headed one, but is he? And what is he really like? He's got this nickname of the Iceman, so he's very aloof and distant, and you don't know why. You think, well, he's just like that. But you find out that there are some secrets he has that perhaps lend him to push people away. Matt is a kid who is dazzled by the rich kids, and he feels a lot of emotions, shows a lot of emotions, and he takes a lot more risks. The girl Stefania, who is the one that went out in the weather, she's experienced some trauma, and there's a lot of secrets that emerge about all of their lives. It's a slow reveal as they're trying to fight for their lives on the water. The ocean is like a desert to them, and that image of desert figures prominently in the story. Griffin's writing is really excellent. He paces the whole thing perfectly. No part of this story drags. And you wonder throughout who is actually going to survive this incident. As the crisis deepens, as you would expect, their nerves get frayed, their minds start to go crazy, and they begin to fight more than just the physical elements. So I think you will like this story. It's a quick read, but it's a riveting read. So Adrift by Paul Griffin. My next story, and I kind of tended with this stack of books to stay in the more realistic part of YA fiction. I've got a couple of fantasies, but not too many, mostly realistic fiction. So my next book is called The Unlikely Hero of Room 13B by Teresa Toten. It is a beautiful, beautiful story about kids who are struggling with obsessive-compulsive disorder. The main character is Adam, and he joins a therapy group. It's kind of a teenage version of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. And he also does individual sessions with a therapist as well. So he goes every week to both sessions. And while in group, he immediately falls in love with a new member named Robin. Robin seems to be further along in her recovery, so Adam kind of latches onto her to try to help himself not escalate in his rituals that he does. But he's struggling with something else too. He's struggling with his mother's mental health disorder, which is hoarding. And so they live in a hoarder house. And he's lived like that pretty much all his life. And he has to struggle with this. And the decline of her mental state is part of this whole story too. She receives letters on a kind of a regular basis, basically berating her for being such a horrible person. Now, I guessed the source of those letters kind of halfway in. And for people who don't guess it, it's a real surprise. But knowing either way does not affect the climactic scene at the end. It's very powerful. I felt that the characters were extremely believable. I know people who have OCD, and that really seemed to be right on spot. The writing is top-notch. You hope and you ache for every one of these kids in this group. And everybody is lying to everyone else while they're in group, Adam included. Everybody lies. But Adam eventually figures out that it takes so much energy to lie that he'd just rather tell the truth. In his individual sessions, his therapist asks him to do lists of I believe this, I believe this, I believe this. So Adam does them, and I love the lists that he comes up with. I loved everything about this book. In this edition, there's a Q&A session at the end with the author where she talks about parts of the book and how she came to write this book, and she also includes resources for teens struggling with mental health issues, which I felt was really helpful. So try The Unlikely Hero of Room 13B by Teresa Toten. You will love Adam. He is awesome. My next book was really cool to read. I received an advanced reader copy last spring at the Texas Library Association conference. So I want to thank Delacorte Press for making those available. And this is called Stone Rider by David Hoffmeyer, and I would describe it as a futuristic Western with motorcycles instead of horses. It is set up in a dystopian world where the elite have all retreated to space stations up in space, kind of near Earth, but just hovering there. And all the rest of us that are left behind are working to provide for the space stations. We can, if we want, earn points to get to the space station, but we have to race with our motorcycles in these special courses that are very dangerous and very evil, and I think President Snow from the Hunger Games would appreciate them. The motorbikes themselves are very interesting because they sort of attach themselves to one particular rider, so if a different person tries to get on a particular motorcycle, it's not going to work right. The weapon of choice in this world is the slingshot, which was kind of cool, and the main character is Adam Stone, another Adam. And the town is Blackwater, and he is desperately trying to escape Blackwater. He's totally in love with Sadie Blood, who is related to the Colonel, who runs the whole show and is the evil guy. There are bad gangs all around, and it is not a nice place to live, so you definitely want to get to the space station if you can. Then an outsider comes in, and he's got his own secrets, and he appears to muddy the waters. And it's action throughout, never stops. The story has only basic world building, which is fine with me because I really don't care for the Lord of the Rings kind of deep, detailed world building. And the author said he was influenced by Elmore Leonard, a very well-known Western writer, and S.E. Hinton's The Outsiders, and I could see both of those coming in. You know, in Western, there's all these elements. You know, it's an unforgiving landscape. It's survival of the fittest. It's a lot of showdowns in the town square. You know, you've got to harden your heart, and all of that is in here, and I loved that. Westerns also contain a lot of misfits, which there are in this story, and the twist about this is that it's got a futuristic sci-fi kind of part of it. So for readers who like a lot of action in their stories, this is the one for them. Stone Rider by David Hoffmeyer. Try it. This is one of my fantasy ones, and I loved this. This is called The Mermaid Sister by Carrie Ann Noble, and it is a very nice retelling of The Little Mermaid by Hans Christian Andersen. It's set in the late 19th century, which is when Andersen wrote his tales. It's got a lot of snake oil salesmen in there, and it's way better than Disney. Disney prettified Andersen's tale, and if you go back and read the original, it's pretty scary. So Carrie Ann Noble takes it and she presents it from a different perspective. The mermaid's name is Marin, but when we first meet her, she is not a mermaid yet. She's just a regular girl, but all of a sudden she starts to transform into a mermaid, evolve very slowly. Her sister, Clara, realizes that, oh, this is all going to happen, and she's going to turn totally into a mermaid. So in order to help her survive, because she's got to live in water, we're going to have to get her to the ocean. So Clara and her friend O'Neill go on a journey with Marin, and so she can get to the ocean. They are then kidnapped on the way by evil gypsies who intend to use Marin as an exhibit in their traveling show, sort of like the old freak shows in the circus. But Clara soon realizes that if Marin is stuck in this jar forever, she is eventually going to die. So they have to figure out a way to escape and get her to the sea. I loved everything about this story, the magic, the evil gypsies, the traveling theaters, the little dragon that figures in here, and the osprey that figures in here. It's certainly so different from Ariel and her Disney sisters, and it was like reading a fresh new tale. So dive right in and try The Mermaid Sister by Carrie Ann Noble. The next book I have is back to realistic fiction. And the first thing I want you to know about this, it's called The Lost Marble Notebook, A Forgotten Girl and Random Boy by Marie Jaskulka. The first thing you've got to know is that it's a very powerful relationship story. And you need to ignore the little inside cover teaser that they always put in here, because it makes it sound like it's this teenage love romance story. It is not. It is a cautionary tale about domestic violence and abuse, and well worth the read. So, Forgotten Girl is a girl, and she keeps a diary in these like composition-like notebooks, a diary of sorts. She's trying to deal with her parents' divorce and her mother's severe depression. And so she writes as her therapy. By happenstance, this random boy, and so that's what he's known by, this random boy comes into her life. Now, random boy has his own issues, and they are pretty deep. And he lives in a home where his dad beats his wife all the time, brutally beats her. At first, this story appears to be a story about two people finding each other and helping each other navigate their troubled lives and their troubled worlds. But as you read, you come to realize that it's not love. It's anger, it's grief, and it's the effects of poor parental modeling. So Forgotten Girl, she tries to rationalize, she tries to justify, she tries to delude herself that, you know, this relationship is wonderful, but the relationship gets worse. Random boy agonizes about his actions. But he believes that the only thing that can cure him is Forgotten Girl, which we all know to be not true in personal relationships, teen or adult. So if you've ever wondered what full-blown domestic violence looks like, and thank goodness I have never experienced it, I think Jaskulka has nailed it. And if you've ever wondered why people don't leave those situations, read this book and you will understand why. Lost Marble Notebook is a novel in verse, much like Ellen Hopkins's novels. And both Forgotten Girl and Random Boy share this notebook. And so what she does is, so you know who's talking, she puts one character's writings in italics and the other in plain type. It's really, really a powerful story, and I loved it. So The Lost Marble Notebook, A Forgotten Girl and Random Boy by Marie Jaskulka. I hope I'm saying her name right. The next book I have, it's got a bright, sunny cover to it. It's called We Are All Made of Molecules by Susan Nielsen. It is a heart-tugging story. It's about coming to terms with people who are different. It's about bullying, it's about families, and it's about trust. So it involves a blended family. Stuart's mother has died of cancer, and Ashley's parents are divorced. And then at some point, Stuart's father falls in love with Ashley's mother, and they become a couple, and Stuart and his father move into Ashley and her mother's home. Now, Stuart is a nerd genius. He doesn't have very many social skills. He's been in a gifted academy kind of as a protection against the real world for a long time, but now he's faced with being in a regular old public high school. Ashley is a mean girl / queen bee who is only concerned with fashion and her reputation and appearance. So she treats everyone badly, and she treats Stuart the worst of all. Meanwhile, Stuart is targeted by a new kid in the high school too, who is Ashley's heartthrob. He's a star basketball player, and he's her dream boyfriend, who turns out not to be such a dream. So as you would expect in a novel, a realistic teen novel, nothing goes well for anyone. But it's Stuart, amazingly, that actually has the skills to deal with what they're dealing with. It's told in alternating chapters between Stuart and Ashley, and you really see their different voices in this story. And I thought the way they expressed things was pretty well done. I hated Ashley from the get-go. I thought she was stupid, she was self-absorbed, and I didn't want to have anything to do with her. I loved Stuart, I loved his intelligence, I loved his nerdiness, and I loved the way he strategized when he faced a problem. By the end, Ashley kind of learned some very important lessons, and I kind of felt sorry for her by the end. And the title, if you're interested, refers to the way Stuart grieves for his mother. And it also refers to the point that if we break all of us down, none of us is different. We're all just made of molecules. So try We Are All Made of Molecules by Susan Nielsen. I loved it. The next one I have is actually a biography. And it is a graphic novel biography, and you'll find our graphic novels with this sticker. Steve Jobs, who everybody knows, this is a biography, a graphic biography of him. It's called Steve Jobs, Insanely Great, by Jesse Hartland. And I loved this because I felt it was a very nicely done, quick biography of Jobs. There's bigger adult ones that you can read, but Hartland really hit all the important points of his life, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and he had that all in spades. There's usually a fine line between genius and madness, and most innovators turn out to be really bad at social skills and fitting in and just not nice people, and that kind of fits Jobs to a T. It's a quick read, and I think teens will linger on. I love the graphics. They're really cool. They're very funky. I think they're going to linger on the pages that describe what technology was like in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, because it's so different from today. And geeks are going to find comfort that they're not alone, and us regular folks, well, we can marvel at Jobs's, the way his brain worked. But after reading this, it's interesting that I really felt even worse that Steve Wozniak didn't get more credit for Apple and the Apple computer than he has. Everybody always says Jobs invented it, but Wozniak was the maker and Steve was the creative promoter, it seemed to me. And so I don't think any of the fame ever did Wozniak justice. Not that he cared, I guess, but it just bothered me, and this book kind of explains how that happened. So try Steve Jobs, Insanely Great, and I don't think you'll be disappointed. It was really a fun book to read because of the illustrations. Lastly, I have a pair of books, and you have to read them in order, and you have to read them together. This one came out last year. This is part one. It's called Now That You're Here by Amy Nichols, and this one just recently came out, and this is called While You Were Gone. And this is the first one, and this is the second one. So we'll start with the first one. And the first book introduces us to Danny and Evie and the concept of a parallel universe. So there's a little bit of dystopia, there's a little bit of romance, there's a little bit of nerdiness, and there's a lot of fun in there. And what happens is there's two Dannys, each in a universe, and they move to they switch places. They move to the other's universe, exchanging bodies and lives. So in this first book, we meet the Danny from Phoenix, Arizona, that is not like our Phoenix. It's right up to the ocean, so that means Nevada and California are apparently gone. And it is a dystopia where everything's regulated, everything's really mean. And our world's Danny gets stuck in there and is pretty confused. So that world's Danny comes to our world, and he meets Evie, who has a counterpart in his world. But this Evie in our world is very different from that Evie in his world. And so dystopian world Danny, that's what I call him, has to figure a lot of stuff out. And Evie's the girl that he falls in love with. And at the end of the book, he's got to choose whether he's going to go back to his original world. And we also don't know why this switch is happening. So that's where we're left at the end of Now That You're Here. So then we pick up While You Were Gone. And in While You Were Gone, we see the Danny from our world that we know struggling with this dystopian world that he has landed in. And he's also struggling with the fact that his parents are still alive in this dystopian world. Back in his world, they were killed in a car accident. We follow him as he figures out why this switch is occurring. And he falls in love with the Evie of the dystopian world, and he has to decide whether he wants to go back to his original world. So it's a lot of tough choices and a lot of ideas about freedom versus family. I love the way it was written. It's very mind-blowing. You kind of think when I describe it that it's not going to work, but it really does. And I love the different personalities. I love trying to figure out what was what. And I love the fact that both Dannys were faced with this big decision about what to do, go back or stay. I felt the characters were well drawn and they were real teams. So you need to read both books. You need to read Now That You're Here first and While You Were Gone. This one actually is on our list, that our TAG group, our Teen Advisory group, they have a list of books that they'd recommend you read, and this one is on there, so they liked it, and so I'm sure they're going to be reading While You Were Gone. And that's all I have for you today. Enjoy, get reading.